Welcome to Riseful, where underdogs rise, justice wins, and every story reminds you, no one stays powerless forever. If you love courtroom twists, neighborhood drama, and real feeling battles for what's right, you're in the right place. Asterisk, asterisk, they pointed a gun at me, over a navy blue front door. That's right, one can of paint turned me into public enemy number one in my own neighborhood. I moved to Sunset Valley for peace and quiet. Instead, I got clipboard tyrants and security guards playing FBI. At first, I thought this was about a paint code, but soon it felt more like surveillance ops than suburban living. Let's just say by the end, someone wasn't walking away with their little plastic badge. When petty power meets a fragile ego, you don't get rules, you get a regime. I served overseas for freedom. Now I'm fighting for it on my front porch. Let me take you back to the beginning. It was a crisp spring morning in Sunset Valley, Arizona, when I moved into what I thought would be my quiet retirement home. 6 years of service behind me, all I wanted was a place to tinker with antique clocks and enjoy peace for once. The house was perfect, modest, clean, orderly, but that order came with a price tag, and that price had a name: Deborah Collins. The first thing I did, like any normal homeowner, was personalize my space. I'd always loved navy blue. The moment I saw that shade in the hardware store, I thought of the waters off Bahrain where my unit was stationed. Navy blue wasn't just a color, it was blood deep for us. So I painted my front door, just one door, a rich navy that made my beige walls pop. For the first time, this house actually felt like mine. But the next morning, as I sipped coffee on my porch, a woman appeared like a ghost in heels. Crisp white suit, clipboard, laminated color chart like it was gospel. "Good morning, Mr. West," she said. Syrupy, fake. "I'm Deborah Collins, president of the Sunset Valley HOA. We need to discuss your door." I walked over, calm but wary. "What about it?" She lifted the chart like it held divine truth. "Navy blue is not an approved door color. Our guidelines section 12 require earth tones, beige, tan, or off-white only." I blinked. "Can I see the guidelines?" She handed me a freshly printed document, no letterhead, no seal, just cosplay HOA nonsense. The footer said it had been established last Tuesday. "Last Tuesday," I said. "That's correct," she chirped. "We're constantly updating to protect aesthetics and property values." The absurdity was almost impressive, but I'd never dealt with an HOA before, so I played along. "How much is the fine?" $300, she said, already handing me a printout. "You have 48 hours to comply." As she turned to leave, she called over her shoulder. "After that, there will be more serious consequences. Some people wear fake uniforms, others wear real delusions." I thought I moved into a neighborhood. Turns out it was a dictatorship with flower beds. That night I went to the hardware store. I bought a can of beige paint, and the next morning I rolled it over the navy. With every brushstroke I felt something cracking inside. It wasn't just paint, it was erasure, a quiet surrender to a woman with no authority but far too much power. But this wasn't the hill I wanted to die on, at least, not yet. 3 days after repainting, I thought I'd passed their test. I was wrong. I was in my garage, cleaning a 1940s pocket watch. Jazz playing softly in the background. It helped me focus. Steady hands, rhythm, peace. Then I heard boots on the driveway, and a knock like someone had a warrant. He was mid-30s, thinning hair, and a mustache that screamed I run a fantasy SWAT team in my head. "Good afternoon, sir," he said. "I'm Darren Hughes, audio security officer for the HOA." I turned the music down. "Audio security exceeded the neighborhood noise threshold," he said, holding up a toy-looking device with cartoon characters on it. "Your garage is producing 51 decibels. That's 1 decibel over the limit." I stared at him. "That's a toy. I'll ask you not to question official HOA equipment," Darren said, clutching it like sacred text. Then he scribbled on a handwritten citation for $800. "When grown adults play police with toys, you get HOA horror stories." I asked to see the regulation. He handed me a laminated flyer that looked like it was made on a middle school project. But here's what really bothered me. Darren wasn't dumb, he was serious. Serious about enforcing pretend rules with real consequences. I'd seen this kind of behavior overseas: paper soldiers with plastic power. I told him I needed time to review it. "Of course," he said, puffing his chest. "But keep in mind, the HOA has escalation procedures." After he left, I sat back at my workbench. My military training kicked in. You observe, you document, you prepare. I installed a small security camera that had been sitting in my closet, angled it right at the street. If they were going to treat this like a war game, fine. I'd start gathering evidence, and I had a feeling this was just the beginning. Asterisk. I made a mental note. Check the HOA's financial records. Arizona law says they must be available to any resident upon request. But before I could even do that, I came home to find another envelope taped to my front door. Inside, a fresh citation. This time, visual pollution of community aesthetics. The crime, a $15 plastic flower planter I placed beside my front steps, the exact same type I saw at the community center. Yet apparently my flowers violated neighborhood standards. Fine, $300. That brought my grand total to over $1,100 in violations for painting a door navy blue, playing soft jazz, and decorating with plastic flowers. I wasn't looking at code enforcement, I was looking at a slow-motion hit job. When the rules don't apply equally, they're not rules, they're weapons. This wasn't about flowers, it was about control. So I decided to dig deeper. I went down to the community center and requested the HOA's financials for the past year. The receptionist's hands trembled as she printed them, but legally, she couldn't say no. I took them home, opened a cold drink, and started reading. What I found blew the lid off everything. Over $2,100 in landscape enhancement materials. In the last 6 months, the invoices were from high-end garden centers, but I knew for a fact the flowers outside the center were the same $15 plastic ones I'd bought at the local discount store. Either someone was getting massively overcharged, or the funds were going somewhere else entirely. So I ran a little experiment. Bought 2 identical plastic flower sets from the same store. $30 total. I placed them in front of my house with a handmade sign that read, "One of these flower arrangements violates HOA rules." Can you guess which one? Was it petty? Maybe. But sometimes petty is exactly what the situation calls for. I didn't have to wait long. Within 2 hours, Deborah Collins came marching across my lawn, clipboard in hand, face locked in that furious HOA scowl. "Mr. West, what is the meaning of this display?" she demanded. "I'm trying to understand the rules," I said, as innocently as I could. "You cited my flowers, but the same ones are at the community center. Thought you could help me make sense of it." Her face flushed red. She looked back and forth between the flower sets like her brain was buffering. "The community center is different," she snapped. "Those are official HOA installations." "But they're the same flowers," I said, holding up my receipts. "From the same store." That's when her mask slipped. "You think you're clever, don't you, Mr. West?" she hissed. "I decide what's appropriate and I decide you're a problem." There it was. Not about property values, not about paint, just pure, undiluted power. When people crave control, they'll make flowers a felony. I didn't move into a neighborhood, I walked into a suburban war zone. I watched her storm off and called after her. "I look forward to our next conversation, Deborah," and I meant it. 2 days later, I learned just how far this would go. I was in my garage workshop, delicately reassembling a 1953 railroad watch. The silence was calming. The work was precise. Then I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Intentional. Someone wanted me to know they had arrived. I looked up, expecting Deborah's white suit or Darren's neon vest, but this wasn't either of them. This guy was wearing what looked like a legit security uniform, black tactical gear, badges, patches, the works, and strapped to his hip, what looked like a sidearm. His hand rested on it, not casually. Ready. My military instincts fired instantly. This wasn't some HOA clown show anymore, this was dangerous. "Colby West," he called out as he approached. "I'm Officer Darren Hughes, Sunset Valley HOA Security. Step away from the workbench and put your hands where I can see them." Wait, Darren Hughes, the same guy who showed up with a cartoon toy sound meter. Now he was playing full tactical cosplay, and I was his target. I stood up slowly, raising my hands to chest level, non-threatening but alert. "Step away now," he said again, his hand drifting toward the gun. The energy shifted. I hadn't felt this kind of tension since Mosul. Not the fear, the calculation, the scanning, the cold. Then I noticed it. The gun glinted too much. Real sidearms don't reflect like that. It wasn't real. It was a high-quality replica. And that realization hit harder than if it had been genuine, because pointing a fake weapon, that's how people die when real cops show up. "Darren," I said calmly but firmly, "do you even know the penalty for threatening someone with a replica firearm?" He flinched. Just for a second, but enough. He knew he was in over his head. "This is an official HOA security matter," he said, voice cracking like cheap vinyl. "I have full authority to detain residents who threaten community safety." I took a careful step forward, watching him. He didn't draw. "Good call. Show me your credentials," I said. "Real security has state certification." "Let's see. Yours." He hesitated. Then said, "I don't have to show you anything." I exhaled slowly. Then I said, "Let me explain consequences. Darren, I've had real guns pointed at me for real reasons. I know the difference between a threat and a guy with a plastic badge and a bad fantasy. If you'd pulled that thing on someone else, someone scared, this could have ended with real blood. You're not law enforcement. You're a walking lawsuit in cargo pants." I stepped closer, just enough to make the truth land. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn around, walk back to your car, and think long and hard about whether this LARP fantasy is worth what's coming." He stood there, frozen, weighing it. Then slowly, he backed off. No words, just retreat. And I knew at that moment, the HOA war was far from over, but the line had been drawn. Asterisk. Finally, Darren took a step back. His hand dropped from the fake pistol, dignity trailing behind it. "This isn't over, West," he said, trying to patch together some authority. "The HOA has other ways of dealing with problem residents." I watched him retreat to his car, shaking my head. I really hope it doesn't come to that, Darren, for your sake. That incident was the line in the sand. No more suburban theater, no more clipboard cosplay. Now we were talking about felonies, liability, civil rights. That night, I sat at my computer and started digging like my life depended on it, because at this point, it just might. The first thing I uncovered: Darren Hughes had zero law enforcement background, no certifications, no tactical training, no authority, just a guy who sold car parts. His evolution from measuring jazz volume with a cartoon toy to brandishing a fake firearm in my garage suddenly made twisted sense. A man cosplaying law and order, armed with props and ego, but the financial trail, that's what kicked the door wide open. I spent hours combing through receipts, invoices, and HOA spending reports. And what I found was bold, shameless, organized theft. Thousands of dollars in landscaping materials, security upgrades, and operational expenses, and every dollar traceable to nonsense plastic flowers, prop uniforms, replica weapons. They weren't managing a neighborhood. They were running a racket with garden gnomes and fake guns. This wasn't mismanagement. It was a quiet, well-dressed heist. I made copies of everything, labeled it, indexed it, built a file that would make a federal investigator proud. 3 days after the Darren incident, my breakthrough arrived, not through force, not through court orders, through COURAGEA knock on the door. It was my elderly neighbor from across the street, eyes wary, hands trembling, voice firm. She handed me a digital camera. "I saw what happened the other day," she whispered. "I recorded it from my kitchen." And just like that, I wasn't alone. The footage was crystal clear. Darren pointing his fake weapon at me, dressed like a SWAT team reject. But that wasn't all. She'd been documenting Deborah's behavior for months. Forced evictions, fines with no basis. 4 families pushed out in a single year. Good people bankrupted by citations and threats. And the worst, she had an audio recording from a closed HOA meeting. In the tape, Deborah's voice was unmistakable, cold, calculated by expensive equipment with community funds, then reported as improvements, as long as they shut up and pay. No one checks the receipts. That was it. No more theories, no more guessing. Does hard evidence of corruption, extortion, and abuse of power recorded in her own voice. This wasn't about my door anymore. It was about every family she'd bullied into silence. Every dollar stolen, every law ignored. So I got to work. A community meeting, Thursday, 7 p.m., Sunset Valley Community Center. I didn't accuse, I didn't rant. I did what my training had always taught me: plan, prepare, execute. I spent the week knocking on doors, quietly inviting every household. I used words like transparency, safety, clarity. Never tipped my hand. By 6:30, 23 families showed up, nearly the entire neighborhood. They came curious, maybe even hopeful, because deep down, I think they knew something wasn't right. Deborah showed up fashionably late, navy blue power suit, lipstick, war paint. Darren trailed behind her like a guard dog with a leash made of lies. Well, Deborah announced, her voice soaked in sarcasm. "Mr. West calls his own little meeting. How democratic," she smirked. But I saw the flicker. She didn't know what was coming. I stepped to the front, looked around at the people, good people who'd paid their dues, followed the rules, and trusted the system. They deserved better. They deserved the truth. Sometimes the real threat isn't the stranger at the door, it's the neighbor with a clipboard and too much ambition. "Thank you for coming," I began, calm and even. "I'm here tonight because I uncovered some things I believe every resident deserves to see." I laid down the first item. Receipts showing $150 payments for flower arrangements that cost $15 then. $650 for Darren's security gear, which amounted to a Halloween costume and a toy gun. Eyes narrowed, hands folded, phones came out. Neighbors started recording, but the final nail, I pulled out the audio recorder and pressed play. Deborah's voice filled the room, cynical, arrogant, admitting it all, overcharging, misusing funds, using the violation system as a money-making weapon. Gasps, murmurs, anger. The energy shifted. I saw neighbors whispering, exchanging glances, filming. It was no longer about HOA violations. It was about betrayal. There's a moment in every battle when fear turns into fury. That night, we hit it. And for the first time, Deborah Collins wasn't the most powerful person in the room. When the truth finally came to light, Deborah stood up and made one last desperate attempt to twist the narrative. That recording was made illegally, she barked, but her protests were instantly swallowed by a tidal wave of angry voices. Neighbors demanding to know where their money had gone, why they'd been fined into silence, and what gave her the right to terrorize a community in the name of aesthetics. Her old intimidation tricks weren't going to work tonight. That's when I played my final card, the one that explained why I hadn't folded under pressure, the reason I'd been 2 steps ahead since day one. "There's one more thing you all should know," I said, raising my voice just enough to cut through the noise. 3 days ago, Mr. Hughes here pointed what appeared to be a firearm at me in my own garage, claimed he had the authority to detain residents for HOA violations. The room fell into stunned silence. Because this wasn't about flowers or door paint anymore, this was about weapons, threats, a line that should never be crossed. I have video evidence, I continued, but more importantly, you deserve to know exactly who you're dealing with. I turned my gaze to Deborah. No anger, no performance, just the cold, steady presence that comes from surviving real battles. My name is Colby West. I served 6 years as a Navy SEAL, multiple deployments, real combat, real enemies, real causes. That mattered. The room shifted. Like gravity had changed direction. Now everything made sense, the calm, the planning, the precision. I wasn't just a grumpy neighbor. I was a man trained to see through lies, act under pressure, and finish what needed finishing. I know the difference between authority and cosplay, between community management and organized fraud. Deborah's face drained of color. For the first time since I moved in, she looked scared. Not of me, but of consequences. Good, because this was never about applause. This was about accountability. It was about tearing off the mask of community management and exposing the petty dictatorship underneath. The room stirred again as the community council president Tan, old teacher with the voice of someone who's ended plenty of chaos, up and addressed us all. I think it's clear, she said firmly. We need to vote right now on whether Deborah Collins continues as HOA president and whether we contact the authorities about the fraud Mr. West has documented. Seconded instantly. And within minutes, the vote began. 23 households. 23 votes. Unanimous. Not one person voted to keep Deborah in power, not even Darren, who sat red-faced and silent, the fake security badge practically peeling off his chest. The moment the result was announced, you could feel the air leave the room like pressure finally releasing from a sealed tank. Relief, laughter, applause. Not for me, for freedom. Deborah sat frozen, eyes locked on the ballot box like it had betrayed her. Eventually she stood, gathered her things, and walked out in silence. The rain was over, but the healing just beginning. The council immediately called for reforms, a 5-person rotating board, full financial transparency. Every one of Deborah's ridiculous aesthetic rules gone, an emotion requiring Deborah to repay the community within 30 days or face legal consequences. Darren slipped out quietly during the voting, but not before publicly apologizing. Some neighbors wanted to press charges, but I suggested his humiliation might be punishment enough. He wasn't the enemy. He was just the first domino. 3 weeks later, I stood in my driveway, a cancan of navy blue paint in hand. Time to restore the door that started it all. They told me my door was the wrong color. Turns out it was the perfect shade of resistance. As I stirred the paint, neighbors passed by and waved. A few stopped, joking that it might be the most famous door in Arizona now. And maybe it was, because that door represented more than paint. It stood for everything we'd reclaimed. Trust, community, freedom. Without Deborah breathing down everyone's neck. Sunset Valley came alive again. People laughed more, smiled more. Kids played without their parents worrying about citations. The new HOA board published monthly financials, and decisions were made openly, together, just like it should be. As I brushed on that last coat of navy blue, I took it all in, quiet, peaceful, honest. Sometimes the biggest battles start with the smallest things, like a door. That night, I finally did what I'd wanted to do for months. I fired up the old jazz collection, poured a drink, and disappeared into my garage to tinker with a 1947 railroad watch that had waited patiently through the storm. No more surveillance, cameras, no more fake violations. No more HOA tyranny. Just gears, springs, Miles Davis, and peace. Around 9 p.m. a car pulled into my driveway. It was the council president. She smiled and handed me a small, wrapped package. "You've done something important here, Colby," she said. "We just wanted to say thank you." Inside was a wooden plaque, burned into the wood. Colby West, Honorary Community Hero, for service above and beyond the call of duty. She laughed and added, "We even voted to make you an honorary board member. No responsibilities. Just one job: remind us not to let power go to our heads." I hung that plaque next to my door, the very same door they tried to shame me over. And as she drove away, I couldn't help but think how strange life is. I came here to retire, to blend in. Instead, I helped restore a broken community, not with weapons, not with force, with truth, with receipts, with resolve. They thought I was just a quiet man with a paintbrush. They forgot I was trained to win wars. Tonight, the jazz played soft. My watch gears clicked in rhythm, and my navy blue door gleamed under the porch light, a beacon of peace, purpose, and the quiet power of doing what's right. ***. Thanks for watching another Ricefield original. If you enjoyed this story, smash that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one. And remember, true power isn't in revenge. It's in rising above. ***. Subscribe and stay fueled for justice.